The video opens inside a crowded courtroom. A woman sits quietly at the defense table with her canine dog at her side. To everyone else, she looks ordinary. Just another defendant with scars and silence. The prosecutor mocks her. The jury exchanges smirks, and the judge himself sighs, impatient, convinced she has nothing of value to say. Then, in the middle of the chaos, she leans down and whispers a barely audible command to her canine dog. What happens next silences the entire room. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing to see more stories about the quiet heroes among us. The fluorescent lights of courtroom 237 cast a harsh glow over everyone present, particularly on Selena Vance. She sat at the defense table, shoulders slightly hunched, dressed in a gray blazer and navy slacks, clothes designed to blend into the background. Nothing about her appearance commanded attention, except perhaps the Belgian Malinois canine dog, Shadow, resting vigilantly at her feet. Judge Raymond Caldwell shuffled through documents with visible impatience, occasionally glancing up to study Selena through narrowed eyes. His reputation for efficiency preceded him. Cases in his courtroom moved quickly, especially those he deemed wastes of the taxpayers' money. The state calls Dr. Amelia Voss, announced Prosecutor Gideon Strathmore, a man whose tailored suit and perfect posture exuded confidence. Dr. Voss took the stand, adjusted her glasses, and directed her clinical gaze toward Selena. Dr. Voss, please explain to the court your professional assessment of the defendant, Strathmore prompted. Ms. Vance presents with severe PTSD and selective mutism, likely triggered by trauma, Dr. Voss stated flatly. However, her claims regarding military service with specialized units appear to be fabricated, a common coping mechanism where patients construct elaborate alternate identities. Selena's face remained impassive, but her fingers moved almost imperceptibly beneath the table. And these delusions about classified operations, Strathmore continued, consistent with paranoid ideation. There is no evidence supporting her claimed involvement in any such operations. From the gallery, Clara Hinton, Selena's court-appointed defender, shifted uncomfortably. Objection, Your Honor. Dr. Voss never had security clearance to verify. Overruled, Judge Caldwell cut in. Unless you can produce evidence of these supposed classified operations, Counselor. Clara faltered. My client's service records appear to have been redacted, classified, erased by government conspirators. Judge Caldwell's sarcasm drew scattered laughter from the courtroom. I've heard this particular fantasy before, Ms. Hinton. Selena watched the exchange without expression, only the slight tightening of her jaw betraying any reaction. Beneath the table, Shadow pressed closer to her leg. When asked to speak on her own behalf, Selena opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. After several uncomfortable seconds, she scribbled something on a notepad, which Clara read aloud awkwardly. My client wishes to state that the operation in question remains classified, but Lieutenant Marcus Reed can verify elements of her service record. Lieutenant Reed's testimony began promisingly, but quickly unraveled under Strathmore's cross-examination. So, you never actually served with Miss Vance directly, Strathmore clarified. Not directly, no. And you have no first-hand knowledge of this supposedly classified operation she claims involvement in. Reed hesitated. The details of Operation Ghost, Your Honor, Strathmore interrupted. This witness clearly has no relevant testimony to offer. Judge Caldwell nodded. Unless you're going to tell me the defendant is some kind of secret super soldier, Lieutenant, I suggest we move on. From the back of the courtroom, a distinguished older man with impeccable posture slipped in quietly and took a seat. His eyes never left Selena. The prosecution calls Specialist Carver, Strathmore announced after Reed stepped down. Carver, a government expert on military records, took the stand with practiced efficiency. Specialist Carver, have you thoroughly reviewed all available military records pertaining to the defendant? Strathmore asked. I have, Carver confirmed. There is no record of Selena Vance serving in any special operations unit, nor any evidence supporting her claimed involvement in classified missions. What about her basic service record? There's documentation of Miss Vance's initial enlistment and basic training followed by a medical discharge due to psychological issues. Nothing more. Clara stood for cross-examination. Specialist Carver, in your experience, are there circumstances where military personnel records might be deliberately obscured or classified? Carver shifted in his seat. In extremely rare cases, yes, such as involvement in covert operations. Objection, Strathmore called out. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge Caldwell ruled without hesitation. Clara pressed on. Is it true that certain special operations units operate with documentation that would appear to someone without proper clearance as if the service member had been discharged? Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Ms. Hinton, unless you have evidence to support these theories, move on. Clara glanced at Selina, who sat motionless, her eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance. Only Shadow seemed to react, his ears twitching slightly as though listening to something no one else could hear. During the lunch recess, Selina sat alone in a small conference room, Shadow at her feet. She took out a small notebook and wrote something, then tore out the page and slipped it into her pocket as Clara entered. We need something concrete, Clara said, frustration evident in her voice. The judge isn't buying any of this without hard evidence. Selina nodded once, her expression unchanged. She reached into her jacket and removed a small military memorial pin, placing it on the table. It bore no unit insignia, just a simple design that could belong to any branch of service. What's this? Clara asked. Selina wrote in her notebook. Watch Shadow during the afternoon session. When court resumed, Strathmore called his final witness of the day, a former colleague of Selina's from her brief documented military service. Miss Vance always had these fantasies, the witness testified. Even during basic training, she would hint at being recruited for special assignments. We all thought it was harmless until she started believing it herself. From the gallery, the distinguished older man, Admiral Cornelius Drake, though his identity remained unknown to the court, watched with an unreadable expression. His attention seemed divided between Selina and Judge Caldwell, studying both with equal intensity. As the testimony continued, Selina's right hand moved beneath the table in what might appear to be nervous fidgeting, but followed a precise pattern. Shadow's ears twitched in response, his eyes tracking something no one else was watching. By late afternoon, even Clara Hinton looked defeated. The judge checked his watch repeatedly, clearly eager to wrap up what he considered a simple case of mental illness and misplaced identity. The court will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Judge Caldwell announced. Mr. Strathmore, I assume you'll be prepared for closing arguments. Absolutely, Your Honor, Strathmore replied with a satisfied smile. As the courtroom cleared, Admiral Drake approached Clara in the hallway. You're fighting the good fight, counselor, he said quietly. But you're using the wrong weapons. Excuse me, Clara replied, confused. The evidence isn't in the paperwork. It never was. He pressed a business card into her hand before walking away. Clara looked down at the card. It contained only a phone number, no name or organization. When she looked up again, Drake had vanished into the crowd. That evening, Selina sat in her small apartment, Shadow lying across the doorway. She removed a hidden panel from the bottom of her dresser drawer and took out a small metal case. Inside was a worn photograph of 6 people in desert camouflage, their faces purposely shadowed. She touched one of the figures gently, then returned everything to its hiding place. On her phone was a text message from an unlisted number. Closed circuit. Safe to proceed tomorrow. She deleted the message immediately. The second day of the trial began with Prosecutor Strathmore's theatrical display of confidence. The defendant would have this court believe she served in an elite military unit, he announced, pacing before the jury. Yet, when asked direct questions, she cannot or will not speak. Instead, we're treated to notes passed to her lawyer like a child in grade school. Several jurors smirked. One openly chuckled. The government's position is simple. Selina Vance is suffering from delusions. She has constructed an elaborate fantasy about military service to cope with trauma of unknown origin. While deserving of compassion and appropriate psychiatric care, she is not entitled to the veterans' benefits she has repeatedly attempted to claim, nor access to the classified information she has repeatedly sought. As Strathmore spoke, a court reporter adjusted her camera to capture both the prosecutor and Selina in the same frame. Standard procedure, nothing unusual, except that her equipment seemed particularly focused on Selina's face and hands. Clara rose for cross-examination of the final government witness, Dr. Felix Warwick, chief psychiatrist from the Veterans Affairs Hospital. Dr. Warwick, in your professional opinion, what are we dealing with here? A textbook case of dissociative identity construction, Warwick replied confidently. Ms. Vance has created an alternate persona as a coping mechanism. In this case, the identity of a highly trained military operative and her mutism consistent with her commitment to the delusion. If she speaks, the fantasy might collapse. Throughout the testimony, no one noticed the small military memorial pin on Selina's collar, or the way her eyes systematically scanned the room every 108 seconds, or how Shadow's attention shifted in perfect coordination with her subtle hand movements. No one was really looking at Selina Vance at all. That had always been her greatest advantage. As Warwick continued his testimony, Selina's right hand moved beneath the table in what might appear to be nervous fidgeting, but followed a precise pattern. Shadow's ears twitched in response, his eyes tracking something no one else was watching. From the gallery, Admiral Drake noticed both movements and straightened almost imperceptibly. During cross-examination, Clara attempted a new approach. Dr. Warwick, are you familiar with the tactical sign language used by certain special operations units? Objection, Strathmore nearly shouted. This is absurd, Your Honor. I'm inclined to agree, Judge Caldwell said with visible annoyance. Ms. Hinton, unless you have evidence. I'd like to call a witness who can authenticate certain physical indicators, Clara pressed on. Your Honor, this is becoming farcical, Strathmore protested. Next, she'll claim the K9 dog is also a secret operative. Scattered laughter filled the courtroom. Judge Caldwell didn't bother hiding his smirk. Miss Hinton, you're testing my patience, the judge warned. Unless you have substantial evidence to present, I'm prepared to issue a directed verdict. Clara glanced at the business card Admiral Drake had given her, then back at Selina. Your Honor, I'd like to call retired Admiral Cornelius Drake to the stand. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the distinguished man from the gallery rose and made his way to the witness stand. Judge Caldwell's expression shifted slightly. Recognition perhaps or caution. Admiral Drake, Clara began after he was sworn in. What was your role in the military before retirement? I served as Deputy Director of Special Activities Division under Naval Intelligence for 12 years, Drake replied, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Prior to that, I commanded Task Force Azure for 8 years. Even Judge Caldwell seemed to sit up straighter. Task Force Azure was well known in military circles as the oversight command for several highly classified operations. And are you familiar with the defendant, Selina Vance? Before Drake could answer, Strathmore was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This witness was not on the defense's list. We've had no opportunity to prepare for this testimony. Your Honor, Clara countered. Admiral Drake contacted me only yesterday after observing the proceedings. His testimony is directly relevant to establishing my client's credibility. Judge Caldwell hesitated, clearly weighing the impropriety against his own curiosity. I'll allow it, but keep it brief, Ms. Hinton. Admiral, you may answer the question. I am familiar with Ms. Vance by reputation and service record, Drake stated carefully. And what can you tell us about her service? Very little that isn't classified, Drake replied. However, I can confirm that certain operations conducted between 2017 and 2019 in the Eastern Theater involved personnel whose records would appear to anyone without appropriate clearance exactly as Ms. Vance's appear now. Strathmore scoffed. This is pure speculation, Your Honor. The Admiral has not stated that he knows Ms. Vance personally or can verify her specific involvement in any operation. That's correct, Drake acknowledged. I cannot confirm or deny Ms. Vance's specific role. I can only testify to the existence of protocols that would explain the discrepancies in her record. Judge Caldwell frowned. Admiral, with all due respect, this court needs more than vague allusions to classified protocols. I understand, Your Honor, Drake replied. Perhaps I could suggest an alternative approach. There are certain procedural markers, physical indicators that would be known only to personnel involved in specific operations. What kind of markers? Judge Caldwell asked. Training protocols, particularly for K-9 dogs assigned to certain units, Drake explained. Command sequences that would be impossible to fake or learn secondhand. The courtroom fell silent as everyone processed this information. Selina remained expressionless, but Shadow's posture changed slightly, becoming more alert. Your Honor, Strathmore interjected. This is absurd. The Admiral is suggesting we evaluate the defendant based on how her K-9 dog responds to commands. This isn't a circus. It's actually quite standard procedure in verifying claimed special operations background, Drake countered. When documentation is classified or unavailable, behavioral verification becomes essential. Judge Caldwell studied Drake for a long moment. I'll allow a demonstration, but if this turns into theater, I'll not only dismiss it, but consider sanctions against defense counsel. Clara nodded gratefully. Admiral Drake, could you please explain what we should look for? K-9 units assigned to certain operations receive specialized training beyond standard military working dogs, Drake explained. Their handlers use command protocols that combine elements of multiple languages and precise physical positioning. These protocols are classified and taught only to personnel within specific units. He turned to face the court. If Ms. Vance served where her partial records suggest, her K-9 dog would respond to these protocols in a way that would be impossible to train outside the program. Judge Caldwell looked skeptical, but nodded. Proceed with the demonstration. I won't be conducting it, Your Honor, Drake clarified. I only know of the protocols. Only a handler from the specific unit would know the exact commands. All eyes turned to Selina, who sat motionless at the defense table. Ms. Vance, Judge Caldwell addressed her directly, impatience evident in his tone. If you wish this court to consider this line of evidence, you'll need to participate actively. Selina looked at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. Then she took out her notepad and wrote something, handing it to her lawyer. Clara read aloud, My client requests that the court reporter ensure all video equipment is functional for the record. The court reporter nodded, adjusting her camera slightly. For the record, Judge Caldwell said. The court reporter is recording these proceedings as standard practice. Now, Miss Vance, please proceed with whatever demonstration the Admiral has suggested. Selina remained seated, looking straight ahead. The seconds ticked by in awkward silence. Your Honor, Strathmore said with barely concealed triumph. It appears the defendant is unable or unwilling to perform this alleged demonstration. I move that we. Selina raised her hand slightly, stopping Strathmore mid-sentence. Then she reached into her pocket and removed a small object, a weathered challenge coin bearing no recognizable insignia. She placed it on the table in front of her. Admiral Drake nodded almost imperceptibly. Your Honor, Strathmore protested. What possible relevance does this coin have? Judge Caldwell held up his hand. Let's see where this goes, Counselor. Selina closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with new focus. Her posture shifted subtly, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised. It was as though a different person had suddenly occupied her body. She glanced down at Shadow, who had been lying quietly beneath the defense table throughout the proceedings. Without speaking, she made a series of subtle hand gestures. Fingers splayed, then 3 fingers extended, then a circular motion. Shadow's ears pricked forward, his body tensing with immediate alertness. He moved from his relaxed position to a precisely controlled stance, weight distributed evenly, head perfectly level, eyes forward. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable to anyone familiar with military working dogs. This was not the body language of a service animal responding to a standard command, but the tactical positioning of a combat-trained K-9. Judge Caldwell leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. Selina made another hand signal, right hand flat, then 3 fingers curled, followed by a barely audible whistle pattern. Shadow responded by executing a precise series of movements, shifting position to create a triangulation point between himself, Selina, and the courtroom entrance. His head turned at exact 30 degrees intervals, scanning in a pattern that military handlers would recognize as a security sweep protocol. "Your Honor," Strathmore began, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Admiral Drake spoke up. "What you're witnessing, Your Honor, is a room-clearing protocol taught only to K-9 units assigned to certain special operations teams. It's not something that could be learned from videos or books. The specific pattern and timing are classified." Judge Caldwell's expression had grown increasingly serious. "Admiral, are you suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Your Honor," Drake interrupted carefully. "I'm merely confirming that what we're observing is consistent with protocols used by units whose operations remain classified." The courtroom had grown eerily quiet. Even Strathmore seemed at a loss for words. Judge Caldwell studied Selina with new eyes. "Ms. Vance, do you wish to make a statement to this court?" Selina looked directly at the judge for the first time. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Instead, she wrote something on her notepad and handed it to Clara. Clara read, "Operation Ghostwalk, Paktika Province, Team Echo, February 17, 2019. The effect on Judge Caldwell was immediate and startling. His face paled visibly, and he gripped the edge of his bench. "Your Honor," Strathmore asked, alarmed by the judge's reaction. Judge Caldwell composed himself with visible effort. "This court will take a 30-minute recess. Counselors in my chambers immediately." As they rose to leave, Selina made one final hand gesture to Shadow. The K-9 dog immediately returned to his standard service animal posture. The transformation was so complete it was as if the previous demonstration had never occurred. In the gallery, several spectators exchanged confused glances. Only Admiral Drake remained impassive, watching as Judge Caldwell left the courtroom with unusual haste. Behind the glass walls of the judge's chambers, court observers could see an animated conversation unfolding. Judge Caldwell appeared to be speaking with unusual intensity, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated, while Strathmore's confident demeanor visibly deflated. Clara emerged from the chambers first, her expression a mixture of confusion and relief. She approached Selina and whispered something in her ear. Selina nodded once, her face revealing nothing. When Judge Caldwell returned to the bench, his demeanor had completely transformed. Gone was the impatient skepticism, replaced by something resembling respect or perhaps caution. In light of information presented to this court in chambers, he began carefully. "I'm ordering a brief adjournment to allow the prosecution to reassess their position." Strathmore, looking distinctly uncomfortable, nodded in agreement. "The state requests until tomorrow morning, Your Honor." "Granted," Judge Caldwell replied. "Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow." As spectators filed out, discussing the unusual turn of events, Admiral Drake approached the defense table. "Well played," he said quietly to Selina. "But this is just the beginning." Selina met his gaze evenly, but said nothing. "The unit sends their regards," Drake added, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across Selina's face, recognition perhaps or relief. That evening, as Selina sat in her apartment with Shadow vigilant at her side, her phone chimed with a text message from an unlisted number. "Surveillance package activated. Stand by for extraction protocol." She deleted the message immediately, then walked to the window and closed the blinds. Tomorrow would determine everything. The third day of the trial began with a palpable tension in courtroom 237. Spectators filed in early, word having spread about the previous day's unusual developments. Court officers positioned themselves more strategically around the room, and the media section was notably fuller. Selina arrived with Shadow at precisely 8:45 a.m. Her appearance subtly different. She wore the same unassuming clothes, but her posture had changed, less hunched, more controlled. The small memorial pin on her collar caught the light as she took her seat. Judge Caldwell entered at exactly 9 o'clock, his usual brisk efficiency replaced by a measured deliberation. He surveyed the courtroom carefully before speaking. "Before we proceed, I wish to address a matter of procedure," he began. "Yesterday, information came to light that requires special consideration. Mr. Strathmore, does the prosecution wish to make a statement?" Prosecutor Strathmore rose slowly, his confidence noticeably diminished. "Your Honor, after consultation with my superiors, the state wishes to withdraw all charges against Ms. Vance." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Judge Caldwell allowed it to continue for several seconds before raising his hand for silence. "I see," he said. "Would you care to explain the reasoning behind this decision?" Strathmore cleared his throat. "New information has been brought to our attention that renders the state's position untenable. We believe dismissal is in the interest of justice." "Very well," Judge Caldwell replied. "Does defense counsel have any objection?" Clara Hinton appeared as surprised as anyone. "No, Your Honor. The defense welcomes the prosecution's decision." Judge Caldwell nodded. "Then all charges against Selena Vance are hereby dismissed with prejudice. The court apologizes for any inconvenience this proceeding may have caused." The formal language couldn't disguise the extraordinary nature of what was happening. Judges rarely apologize to defendants, particularly not after spending days openly skeptical of their claims. As Selena stood to leave, Judge Caldwell did something even more unexpected. He stood as well, a sign of respect rarely shown to defendants. The court reporter's camera captured this transformation, focusing on the judge's face as he watched Selena gather her belongings. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Clara moved to shield Selena from the crowd, but Selena simply walked through them with quiet dignity, shadow creating a natural buffer between her and the press. "Miss Vance, can you comment on the sudden dismissal? Is it true you served in a classified military unit? Why won't you speak about your service?" Selena maintained her silence, moving steadily toward the courthouse exit where Admiral Drake waited. "Ms. Vance is not giving interviews at this time," Clara announced to the persistent reporters. "Please respect her privacy." As they reached the courthouse steps, the court reporter who had been documenting the proceedings approached cautiously, holding out a business card. "Ms. Vance," she said quietly. "My name is Lena Maris with Justice Watch. The footage from today's proceedings will be on our public feed by this afternoon. I thought you should know." Selena accepted the card with a nod of acknowledgement. By that evening, clips from the courtroom had spread across social media. The most popular showed Judge Caldwell's face as he realized the significance of Selena's demonstration with Shadow, followed by his unprecedented show of respect as she left the courtroom. The viral video titled "Judge's Face When He Realizes Who's Really on Trial" had accumulated millions of views within hours. Comment sections filled with speculation about Selena's background and the classified operation she may have been part of. News outlets picked up the story, running segments with titles like "Silent Witness," "The Mystery Woman Who Stunned a Federal Judge," and "Service Dog or Military Asset, Courtroom Demonstration Raises Questions." 3 days after the trial's unexpected conclusion, Selena sat on a park bench watching families enjoy the autumn afternoon. Shadow lay at her feet, alert but relaxed. Her phone showed dozens of notifications from news outlets seeking interviews. She ignored them all. A young veteran with a prosthetic leg approached, stopping a respectful distance away. He said nothing but offered a silent nod. Selena returned it with quiet dignity. "They're saying you were with Team Echo in Paktika," he said quietly. "I was with support operations in the region. Lost my leg when our convoy hit an IED." Selena studied him carefully, then reached into her pocket and removed her weathered challenge coin, displaying it briefly before returning it to her pocket. The veteran's eyes widened slightly. "I thought so," he said. "There are rumors going around about what happened to your team. Some of us have been trying to get the records unsealed for years." Selena took out her notepad and wrote something, handing it to him. He read it and nodded. I understand. Thank you. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, those of us who know, we remember every day. As he walked away, more veterans began appearing in the park. Some in pairs, others alone. None approached directly, but all acknowledged Selina with silent respect. A nod, a subtle salute, a hand over heart. They formed a loose protective circle around her bench, creating a buffer between her and curious onlookers drawn by the recent publicity. Admiral Drake arrived last, taking a seat beside her on the bench. The videos have created quite a stir, he observed. The Pentagon is officially declining to comment, which is telling enough. Selina nodded, unsurprised. There's discussion about formally recognizing your team's actions, Drake continued. The political climate has shifted enough that certain operations can now be acknowledged, at least partially. Selina took out her notepad and wrote, the others first. Drake nodded. Of course. Torres and Amari's families have already been notified. Bennett and Lynn as well. She wrote again. And Morales still in recovery at Walter Reed. His condition has improved enough that he's been asking about you. Says you still owe him $20 from a bet in Kandahar. For the first time since the trial began, Selina smiled. Brief but genuine. There's something else, Drake said, his tone growing more serious. Judge Caldwell served as a JAG officer during the initial classification of Operation Ghost Walk. He was one of the legal architects who designed the documentation protocols that essentially erased your team from official records. Selina's expression revealed nothing, but Shadow shifted position slightly, pressing closer to her leg. He recognized the operation code name immediately, Drake continued. More importantly, he knew that only 6 people were authorized to know both the code name and the specific date you mentioned, and only 3 of them are still alive. Selina wrote, why did he allow the case to proceed at all? Plausible deniability, Drake replied. Until you demonstrated the K9 protocols, he could maintain the fiction that you were just another claimant with delusions of grandeur. Once you proved otherwise, he had no choice but to contact his former superiors. She nodded, understanding the layers of protection that had been established around operations like hers. There's been a security review launched, Drake added. Strathmore had no idea what he was stepping into when he prosecuted your case. Someone higher up should have flagged your file before it ever reached court. Selina wrote, it wasn't a mistake. Someone wanted this public. Drake's eyebrows rose slightly. You think this was deliberate? She nodded once decisively. To what end? Selina gestured around the park where veterans continued their quiet vigil at a respectful distance. Drake considered this a signal to others that they haven't been forgotten, that operations like yours might eventually be acknowledged. She wrote, a reminder that silence doesn't mean absence. Well, Drake said after a thoughtful pause. If that was the intent, it seems to be working. The videos have over 20 million views now. There's talk of congressional inquiries into how veterans from classified operations are treated by the VA and benefits systems. As they spoke, a young woman approached cautiously, stopping several feet away. She clutched a small bouquet of flowers, clearly nervous. Excuse me, she said. I don't mean to intrude, but I wanted to thank you. My brother was a translator for American forces in Afghanistan. He always said there were operations that saved countless lives but would never be acknowledged. Seeing you stand up for the truth, even silently, has meant so much to our family. She placed the flowers on the edge of the bench and stepped back, her eyes shining with emotion. Selina nodded in acknowledgement, her expression softening slightly. As the young woman walked away, Drake smiled. You've become something of a symbol, Commander. Not exactly standard procedure for someone with your background. Selina wrote one last note. Nothing about our mission was ever standard. She stood, signaling the end of their conversation. Shadow rose immediately, positioning himself at perfect heel position. As Selina walked away, her posture straight and confident. The scattered veterans throughout the park stood in silent respect. A week later, a small package arrived at Selena's apartment. Inside was a formal military decoration in a case with no markings, accompanied by a note that read simply "authorized at the highest level, long overdue." That same afternoon, Judge Raymond Caldwell announced his retirement from the federal bench, citing a desire to work on Veterans Affairs issues. In his first post-retirement interview, he referenced the viral courtroom video that had brought attention to his career. "Sometimes," he told the interviewer, "justice requires us to acknowledge what cannot be spoken. There are men and women serving this country whose sacrifices will never be publicly recognized. That doesn't make those sacrifices any less valuable or deserving of honor." When asked if he was referring to anyone specific, Caldwell smiled. "I'm not at liberty to say, but I will tell you this. In my 30 years on the bench, I've never been more humbled than when I realized who was standing before me in that courtroom." The clip of his interview paired with the original courtroom footage sparked a new wave of interest in Selena's story. Veterans organizations reported unprecedented increases in donations and volunteers. Military forums buzzed with renewed discussions about classified operations and the toll of silence on those who served. Through it all, Selena maintained her silence. But as spring arrived, she began volunteering at a local veterans center, working with service dogs and their handlers. She never spoke about her past, never claimed any special knowledge or expertise. She simply worked quietly and efficiently with the dogs and the veterans who needed them. And if some of those veterans recognized the precision with which she handled the animals, the subtle commands that produced extraordinary results, they never mentioned it. They simply nodded in silent understanding and went about their healing, their dignity restored by the knowledge that someone remembered what they had sacrificed. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone?